us for sometimes, and I don't know a lot more about your work.
I would just actually
but-
give props to Becky Samfield,
Okay.
who is our
Sure.
advocacy manager,
Sure.
and I can just chat a little about the evolution of the
Sure.
job.
That's great.
So
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you-
and feel free, to put in any political announcements you want for the organization. I mean, you're nice enough to do this, and that's great, but also
care. And volunteering.
It's hard to explain to people. Funding a role like this, unfortunately, like do it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard, it's hard, yeah, it's hard to explain it sometimes.
There's worse things that
Yeah, that's true. Peter has
We're live? All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Munez. Thanks so much for coming today, and thank you to the John Ben Snow Memorial Trust for funding this speaker series. This event today is the second speaker series in a series of 4. So the next one should be happening sometime in the spring. So pay attention to your email, our Facebook, Twitter, for an update on when that will be happening. So the event today is not only live in our headquarters here in Syracuse, but it's also being streamed live for Pro-Literacy's member programs across the country. So it's exciting for us to be able to present this to you here in the room, as well as all of our member programs and such a large audience. So with that in mind, we do ask you to please stay quiet during this so that those that are streaming this live are able to hear and all of the panelists. There will be time for questions when that time comes around. If you could just raise your hand, I'll be walking around with a microphone. So again, those that are streaming this live are able to hear your questions. And then this is Peter Waite. He is our Senior Vice President here at Pro-Literacy, and he will be moderating today's event.
Thanks very much, Alicia, and welcome everybody here and also everybody online. Before we start, just want to also thank Alicia as well as Sarah Howell, who were sort of the 2 organizers for this series of presentations, and it's terrific. We also have lurking in the back Kevin Morgan, President of Pro-Literacy as well. And so we're encouraging everyone to, as we have the questions and answers, to chime in with questions, comments, or observations that you have for the session. Well, certainly I think everyone would agree that there's probably no more timely opportunity for us to have a discussion around advocacy than the day before a very historic inauguration. So as we look at some of the opportunities associated with advocacy, as well as some of the challenges, it's a very opportune time for us to dialogue about that and also to encourage programs, and particularly not-for-profits, to look at what the importance of advocacy is in terms of the work that we do. And we hope to look at that at both the federal level, at the state level, and the local level. And so we've asked some really stellar individuals to be able to help share some of their perspective with us as panelists. And what we're going to do is take about 5 to 7 minutes and ask each one of them to give us some ideas and some thoughts about their experiences at various different levels and the importance of advocacy. And then we'll open it up to questions from both folks online as well as folks here, and some dialogue and interaction that we'll do among everybody else here. So we appreciate you holding off on your questions until the end, but we'll have a good half of the session will be specifically around doing precisely that. So let me introduce the panelists. Starting on my far right, we're going to have Becky Lehrer from the Food Bank of Central New York. This is not Becky, but this is, Becky is unfortunately, she came down with laryngitis yesterday, and so she was really disappointed here. The good news is we do have Becky's boss and someone who's very rich in terms of understanding both the importance of advocacy and involvement here in Central New York. And Kathleen Stress you've been with the organization for what, 10 years or so?
Yeah, 9 years, yes.
9 years, yeah, so it's terrific. So a rich opportunity and certainly has a lot of experience relative to not-for-profits and the challenges of local, state, and federal funding as well. To her left, Mark Kass, and Mark is the Executive Director of ACTS here in Syracuse. Very active organization looking at community development in this area. And Mark has also been very active and had a long history of working with pro-literacy as well in a variety of areas, both in terms of our community engagement, our program, and student involvement. Has had a very rich history at both the state, national, and local levels. And so appreciate having you here, Mark, and glad to have you come back. And then finally, Marcia Tate, a longtime colleague of mine, had also been involved working as the Director of Public Policy for Pro-Literacy after Laubach Literacy and Literacy Volunteers of America merged. Marcia has also had the privilege of being the chair of the National Coalition for Literacy, an honor that I've also had, although both of us would probably agree that in this situation it was probably a very challenging opportunity or times to be able to try to work at the national level where you're sometimes feeling like you're herding cats. And so Marcia, though, presently now is the Executive Director of Literacy CNY, Literacy Central New York, and has done a very fine job of being particularly active at the local level, but also a very significant presence at the state level. In this state, there's significant resources that are coming from the state, and she has a very, very strong history in helping out, ensuring that that funding continues. So we appreciate everyone here. So we'll go ahead and start, and I asked Mark to lead off for us, if you would, sharing some of your perspectives.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm very happy to be here. As Peter said, my name's Mark Kass, and I was asked a month or so ago to serve on this panel as the Executive Director of ACTS, the Alliance of Communities Transforming Syracuse, which is a volunteer-driven social justice advocacy organization. And but if you see my name tag, it now says Northside Learning Center. So in just the last week or so, I've left as the director of ACTS and became the first full-time professional director of a startup literacy program here in Syracuse called the Northside Learning Center. But I'm going to speak primarily about the work with ACTS, and obviously there's some intersection there. So ACTS is a congregation and organization-based nonprofit working on multiple social justice issues. So in this arena of advocacy, you often see single issue organizations, and ACTS is part of a network, a national network called Gamaliel, which is headquartered in Chicago. And again, thinking about tomorrow's historic events, or more accurately thinking about President Barack Obama's last full day serving as our president, Gamaliel is the organization where he was a community organizer with early in his career. And so the model with ACTS is very grassroots oriented. From among our members and from concerned community members, we form task forces around particular issues, and those issues are selected in a really democratic way. So every 3 years or so, ACTS conducts what we call a listening campaign, asking everybody associated with the organization to go out to their networks, be that within an organization they work, their neighborhood, or the congregation they're a member of, and surface what these most important issues are. At the end of that, those are compiled, and then we have an assembly where people literally hear pleas for those particular issues, and then they vote with sticky dots to select the top 3, of which task forces are then formed. So again, these are all very volunteer driven. So I think within the adult education and literacy field, seeing if you have an organization like ACTS is one opportunity to connect and raise the adult literacy issue, for consideration of them. From there, those task forces design, well, first they analyze the issues, what exactly are the most pressing problems within that, and then they start to form solutions and then begin the more formal advocacy and outreach process. So in the whole history of ACTS, which is about 15 years old, there's never not been an education task force. It is one of the central issues, I think, in every community across the country. So there's always a strong, strong interest. In fact, my introduction to ACTS was as a volunteer, initially serving as a co-chair of an education task force. The current focus right now of that is expansion of pre-kindergarten services for 3- and 4-year-olds in Syracuse within the city. And through their efforts, the numbers have gone up, significantly. Over 350 additional 3- and 4-year-olds in Syracuse now have access to pre-K, but there's still a gap, and the goal of this particular effort is to make sure that every 3- and 4-year-old whose parent wants them to participate has a high-quality seat to jump into. So my role, really as director, is to coordinate, support these volunteers. And so I see a lot of parallels in the adult literacy work, that we have large numbers of people from staff and volunteers and board members and others, and think that your role could be coordinating their advocacy activities. in addition to the mission and vision of ACTS, we went through a process where we clarified the values of the organization. So the first listed value and the most important value is that on any particular issue, the people impacted by that issue need to be in the lead, and not only in speaking in terms of the advocacy piece, but analyzing and designing the solutions to that. So I think if there's one thing you take away from today, is that message that it comes up with better solutions, and I think more powerful activities as you reach out to influence elected and appointed officials. So for this field, that means involving your students, your volunteers, and involving them early on in the process of, what do we need to do? And that brings programmatic change as well. And I think that can be very powerful. One of the intersections, that I've seen in my literacy work here as well as in my ACTS work was we had a very competitive congressional race in Onondaga County or in this region, and there was a number of refugee groups, newcomer groups who were really gaining a sense of their political power, and as far as I know, they were the only organization in town who successfully got the two candidates for that congressional office to the same event, the same forum at the same time. So my role was really providing the space and a little bit of advice. They ran this event, and that's what got those people to the table. And we had another high point where one of the communities, the Oromo community of Ethiopia, had done a couple of marches downtown. They had reached out to the incumbent, Congressman Katko, and literally in the room with about 120 people on a Saturday morning, they asked him to commit to a piece of legislation that they had been advancing, and he publicly committed, that day. So I think there's some real lessons learned in this, is to get, people to make those very public commitments, doing that homework, and it was just a very powerful moment and really deepened the relationship between these communities, and they addressed a whole range of issues, all of which in my mind connect to adult education and the key role it plays in poverty and other issues. How are we doing on time?
Good. Just about 1 minute left if you want.
Okay, all right. So I think some of the other kind of key strategy pieces are that, I think we often, in my experience in the adult education and literacy field, I think we don't do as thorough of a job as identifying allies and opponents. I think we've always done, primarily through pro-literacy and the National Coalition's leadership, done a good job on the kind of policy analysis piece, but I don't think we've been using enough strategies in terms of the media and really pushing folks to get on board early on. I think we don't always do that deep analysis. I think there's many more allies out there than we've traditionally reached, and I think the number of tactics that I've seen used historically have been really kind of the more moderate ones. So I think maybe some more aggressive actions, particularly on the local level, where people are, speaking more powerfully and using multiple strategies would really help our advocacy efforts.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. I think some quick takeaways that I hear from you, I think, are really critical and ones that we often kind of forget. The idea of partnering with others early on and identifying, and I'd like to follow up later on in a question like this in terms of how to go about doing that with other organizations, poverty organizations, for example, who you don't really think about as an important critical element. Clearly, the idea of involving those people who are indigenous to the cause that you're in, the actual individuals which you're working with. Certainly in adult literacy, you were a leader in that and organizations, and I know that when you talk to people on the Hill or anywhere, having an adult learner involved in that is as credible as you can get. It is a critical element of it. I think that's really, really important. Clearly making an ask. I mean, just having something that you're really going to take to them and getting an ask and taking the opportunity. Great example with Representative Ketko doing something like that. And then finally, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we don't do a really good job of identifying really who are other allies and non-traditional allies sometimes that you don't really think about. So I think those are really, really good points. So thank you. Well, we will turn back to also staying local in terms of fighting those same kinds of issues. Kathleen, if you'd share with us a little bit some of the experiences and some of the things that you've got coming from the food bank perspective.
Sure. So for those of you who may not know, Food Bank of Central New York is the primary food supplier to 346 emergency food programs. So that's food pantries, soup kitchens, emergency shelters. And we provide service to 11 counties, so about 25% of the state. So from an executive director perspective, certainly I have that external partnerships and being able to work with our programs but connect their voice to our elected officials through advocacy. But prior to me being executive director, my predecessor, Tom Slater, really in the position when we were, I think it was about 2012, the governor had proposed block granting funding. And so what that impacted for us is that the Farm Bill and SNAP benefits, which are food stamps, was able to be lumped under maternal care and maternal human services. And what that would have done for us as programming is cut our funding. So we, along with 8 other food banks across our New York State region, were able to go to the governor and work with our elected officials to block that proposed block grant. And so that was really the development of how do we take ourselves to the next level of advocacy. So we, before that, we started in 1985 as a food bank, and we would always meet as an executive director or as a director of member programs with our local elected officials, trying to at least have them understand what we did and how we helped feed the hungry. But what we needed to do was elevate that, and really the 2012 block grant position that it put us in was how do we take that and strategize to be that unified voice for those who were trying to help on a daily basis. So that's where poor Becky, who is sick with laryngitis today, she came in. So we were able to bring Becky as our advocacy resource manager on staff and really evolve and grow our position. And our position is twofold. We're fortunate to have a local voice and a local presence across our 11 county service area. We are also in a nice position that we are part of Feeding America, and that is our parent organization. So we also have a network of 200 food banks in which we have that unified voice. But locally, I think the hardest part was all these partner agencies, so our food pantries, our soup kitchens, most of them are volunteer run. So those are individuals who are taking the time, they're not paid staff, but they're putting efforts in to run a pantry, doing it on the time in which they have available, and ensuring that their communities have the food resources. So then when you go to them and say, help us sign on, help us go to an elected official, let's talk about an appropriation, their heads are spinning. They have no idea, it scares them. They just want to feed the hungry. They want to make sure that they have the food for that. But if we don't have those voices of not only those partner agencies and the coordinators on site, but as well as the constituents, the people in which we're serving the food, we're just the lame duck. So what we've been able to do is really a twofold process at the food bank. And the first one is looking at food bank services overall. So we took it upon ourselves with Becky's assistance to go out and consistently meet with our elected officials. So it's not just a one time a year, it's one time a year in Washington, one time a year when they're in district in Syracuse, and then making sure that we infiltrate with their staffing team of here's some updated data. And so Becky was instrumental in creating district sheets that really say to our legislator, here is your constituents in the county, or the areas in which you serve, because sometimes there are multiple counties. Here's the programs in which the food bank serves. And then here's the return on your investment when you support the Farm Bill, when you support SNAP benefits. So really showing some tangible data. But I think along echoing what Mark says is not only that data set point, and we are able to show data, it's those stories. So that emotional connection. If you can have a constituent or one of our partner agency coordinators come along and say, this is how it impacts my program. This is how it changes the construct of my services, helps us to elevate that. So certainly consistent outreach, consistent messaging, making sure that even if you don't have any new and exciting information, that you share that, hey, we're still on the horizon, just checking in. What priorities does your office have? Is there any data that you could use from us, whether it's literacy, whether it's hunger, whether it's poverty? We all intersect. And then we were very fortunate to have a Feeding America grant that allowed us to apply for advocacy capacity. And so we have a 2-year grant, it's $100,000. And what we've been able to do with that is create education sessions for our partner agencies. So we're going out to all our 11 counties and having education series on really Advocacy 101. What can you do as a participant? How can you reach out to your elected official? What are the easiest ways? And then also taking that language, so for us, the appropriations language is certainly around child nutrition, it's around the Farm Bill, it's around SNAP, food stamp benefits. But your eyes will spin if I say appropriation L 2001.A, B. No one even knows what I'm saying. But when I go into a room and say child nutrition is important to us because it allows us to feed kids in the summer when they don't have access to school lunch and breakfast, then people are like, oh, I get it. And so what we're able to do through these sessions is take all that scary language and put it into layman's terms for our partner agencies to say, I got this. I can be on board with that and share and go on a visit with you. And then I can be the one to share that story of that child who comes to me and doesn't have food, and we need to ensure that their family is fed. So the advocacy grant has allowed us to, I guess, really assist, take all that scary appropriations language and make it into easy to learn, tangible advice on how do you approach your elected official, how do you reach out, how's the best way to reach out. And as much as we think it's the handwritten note, which is called snail mail, it's really email. So if you can do a direct email request and a thank you note to your elected official is always important. And so also, in addition to that, we've had when I talk about stories, the grant also allows us to create videos. So we've gone out and we've really talked with our stakeholders. So a pediatrician's office, and about how they screen for food insecurity at their office and how that connects to our services, or how a pantry coordinator has seen the increase in service and how viable and helpful USDA commodities, Farm Bill, are to them. And when you have those stories, even if it's in a video component on an iPad that you're showing your elected official, they would rather see that than just hearing from Kathleen at the food bank that this is what's happening across our service area. So those success stories, or just stories of impact, are very important and very emotional, and that's what really drives us to listen to the data. And so if you don't have an advocacy grant and you don't have an advocacy person to do this all the time, then I think we're very blessed here in local Syracuse region to be able to connect and coordinate services of at least advocacy. So not only could I reach out to Marcia or Mark, but we have Human Services Leadership Council, and they have an advocacy team. If you're not a member of NICON, they're still also very willing to share their expertise on how you outreach and approach advocacy. Also, make sure you seek out those elected official staff. So if you can't get to Congressman Kako, make sure you make friends with his chief of staff. Those are the people that will get you in and get you connected and share that information in front of any elected official. So from a food bank perspective, we've been very fortunate to be able to evolve. The advocacy grant elevated our opportunities to help our partner agencies in strengthening training courses and just giving them language to be able to feel more comfortable to when we reach out and say, can you sign on to this letter? And how can you go to a visit with us? And I will end that with one other piece that we've done through the help of this grant right now is we have advocacy captains, and those are our program coordinators, so ones who are running the food pantry, who are our volunteers, who are going to join us in Washington at a anti-hunger policy conference, and not only do they get to attend the sessions during the conference, but they're attending the on the Hill visits with us to be the voice, that unified voice of who is hungry and how can we help provide, or at least at the minimum, maintain services so folks, we can lead them to self-sufficiency.
Great, thank you very much, Kathleen. I think that, again, you point out some really critical elements that I draw from in terms of both your experience and in general experiences around advocacy. I mean, the idea of really identifying the specific challenges, knowing what that opponent is, as Mark says, and being able to make that articulated case. A unified message, clearly vital in terms of having a real significant impact. Devoting resources, I mean, I think it's really important, and you're right to look at other alternatives. You're lucky to have those resources, but someone like Becky clearly dedicated to that, and then knowing how to utilize those is critical to having that be successful, or at least linking to others who may have some of those resources is going to be a really, really critical element to doing it, and you did a terrific job of it. Training, clearly, and another piece we sometimes forget about, you think you just send out people to do it, but the critical nature of being able to train and being able to have both those cheat sheets and that information and the articulation of your issue in a way that people can understand. Great example, I think, of that finally. And then making the kind of linkages to the others that we talked about before in terms of non-traditional partners, and what are their resource efforts, and when are those resource efforts going to be helpful for everybody. So you've done a terrific job, and I know you have, and a terrific staff and organization. I know that in particular because we were shamelessly, we stole one of your staff people here, Alicia, who you saw before. Yeah, so I apologize. It was nice of you to come and hold no grudges, but we knew you had terrific staff, and so we wouldn't hesitate to come.
I can't say negative anything on the panel when I'm sitting on there.
Well, thank you.
Alicia's wonderful.
We appreciate it. That's great. Good. Well, as I mentioned, and finally we have Marcia Tate, an old colleague of mine, a longtime colleague of mine, not an old colleague of mine. I will be careful. I'll do that. But we have together, in many instances, had an opportunity to deal with advocacy. But Marcia has really spent a large part of her career deeply ingrained in advocacy at both the federal, state, and the local level. And delighted to have you join us and give us some of your war stories and thoughts.
Thank you, Peter. I kind of feel like what I should say is what they said, because a lot of the points that I had planned to make, you've touched on. But I'd also like to start by just briefly describing our local agency. Literacy CNY is the successor to what was Literacy Volunteers of Greater Syracuse, which was Ruth Colvin's, for those of you who know the long history of pro-literacy, Literacy Volunteers in Lubbock, was Ruth Colvin's very first local program. So this movement, volunteer literacy movement that we are all a part of, really began here in Syracuse. As a result of that, there are many literacy organizations here in Syracuse, including Pro-Literacy and Mark's new affiliation with the Northside Learning Center. And so it's an interesting place to be where you are sort of simultaneously trying to differentiate yourself from the role of those other organizations who may do similar but not the same work. And we, of course, understand that at a very detailed level, but the people you are advocating with may not. And then on the other side of that coin, you want to work in partnership and collaboration with those other organizations, because together your voice is louder and your message is stronger. So as they've both already talked about, we do have a local group of the executive directors of nonprofit organizations, large and small. We are all involved with their advocacy efforts. We have a literacy coalition here in Onondaga County. Ginny is sitting back there. We work with that organization to ensure that we are all talking about literacy across the lifespan. And I think we have all probably at one time or another gotten involved with organizations that on their surface or their face may not seem to be an obvious connection. But for example, at the federal level, in this changing world of WIA to WIOA, there's a tremendous emphasis on the labor aspects of that legislation and job training job readiness. So I belong to a group called Greater Syracuse Works, I think you do too, and other labor-related organizations in order to make sure that I'm aware of where those trends are going so that I can make sure that I'm positioning our agency appropriately given those changing trends. Literacy CNY serves adults who read, write, or speak English below the 6th grade level. We work very closely in partnership with our city school district, BOCES, which is unique to New York, other community-based literacy organizations, to provide as much instruction as we collectively can to students in our community. I'd like to go back a bit, pull back out to about 60,000 feet for a moment and answer the question Peter asked me initially, which was, why is public policy advocacy important? And I'd like to make a couple of comments about that because we are a very small organization. I have 3 full-time staff, 2 part-time equivalents, and 1 full-time teacher, and a couple people on contract, so very small. That means that I am the advocacy person, the PR person, the fundraising person, the legal person. People in the room are nodding for those of you on the webinar who can't see this. The accounting person, and of course, you know, that small thing we all try to do, which is provide instruction to students, occasionally causes me to have to get involved in what we actually do. So if you're that person, you're probably sitting there wondering, how do I find the time in my day to learn all this public policy stuff, and why is it an important investment of my time? What's the return on that investment really going to be? So public policy advocacy, I think of it much more broadly than just meeting with elected officials. And I think one of you mentioned the public relations, media cultivation aspect of this. If you're going to get involved in public policy advocacy, you have to establish relationships with not only your elected officials, but your local media. And by that I mean reporters, on-air personalities, local celebrities, all of those folks, because your elected officials are going to be looking at that media and wondering why you are trying to talk to them about an issue they don't even know exists if you haven't been doing that. So that's a really important part of this as well. Letters to the editor, and there are some inexpensive ways to do this. Letters to the editor, having events, you all do events, invite all these people to your events, get them to MC your local fundraiser, because you never know where someone that you have a relationship with, where they might end up and how they might end up in a position to help your local effort or your issue. So you've got to have all that on your radar screen. Making sure that you cultivate these relationships keeps the issue of adult education and your agency, it raises awareness. It keeps it in the spotlight with all those folks. I'd like to also talk a little bit about, you mentioned the experiences I've had at federal, state, and local, with federal, state, and local advocacy, and I thought you were going to say earlier we both have had the dubious distinction of being the chair of the National Coalition for Literacy. It is quite a different thing to go to Washington. And if you've never done it, it can be very intimidating. You know, you go into these beautiful old buildings and they're all lined with marble, and our congressmen and women and the senators are all, you know, in their nice Armani suits running around looking very important and very busy, and it can be a bit intimidating. And then you likely may not ever meet with your senator or congressman if you go to Washington, because they're on the floor, they're voting or they're negotiating or whatever. And so you end up meeting with a staffer who later you're going to say to your colleagues in your board, how come they're all 20 years old in Washington? Is there some law that they can't stay when they get to be 25? You know, but it's important to meet with those staffers, because those staffers are the ones who are informing the senators and the Congress people about the issues that matter and providing the research to support the positions that they will then hopefully be taking. In my experience, state advocacy is a little less intimidating. I mean, at least here in New York, if you go to the state ledge, you know, you're going to meet with, we have a Senate and an Assembly those folks are really very interested in meeting with you, with their constituents. They really want to know what is happening in their home communities. And you are more likely, New York's a big state with a lot going on. Nevertheless, every time I've gone to Albany, I've met with my elected official as well as staff. I've never been bumped for a meeting or something else. So it's a bit friendlier, but you can also invite them to come visit you when they're home, whether they're federal or they're state. You should get them on your mailing list. If you have e-newsletters, get them on your e-newsletters. If you are using social media, follow them on Twitter. They will follow you back. Like their page on Facebook. They will likely like yours. And make sure you invite them to all your events. Get them to your events. And to underscore what Mark said, to the extent that it is possible for you to do so, engage your students in that process. So one of the things I've done is I've invited our state elected officials when they're home to visit my program and actually visit a classroom and sit and talk with the students. It's always interesting because some of our students are a little intimidated by that. You know, in comes this New York State official. They don't really know what they do in Albany. Of course, many of us don't really. And you know, it can be intimidating. Then I've had other experiences where the students get all excited and they really get engaged in the conversation. So, but it's important to do that. You should be on a first name basis with your elected officials staff, as has already been said. Final thoughts. Public policy advocacy is really a long-term proposition. You're really building long-term relationships with people. And so you want to make that as personal as possible. As I think you said, don't wait until your funding has been cut and then show up at your official's door and expect them to respond to you. You need to be cultivating this relationship all year long, every year, in good times and in bad times. Invite them to your events, and I already said, add them to your mailing lists and visit with them when they're home. And finally, and you also said this, thank them. If they vote at your state or federal level for something you support, drop a note and say thank you for that vote. Even if it wasn't successful, even if the legislation didn't pass, but they voted for it, thank them. And engage your board members in doing that work too, because they are the influencers in your community. So your boards should be involved in your public policy planning. Say thank you after every visit. And if you can possibly create an opportunity for a photo op with them when they do come to visit or they attend your event, make sure the staff in that office gets that photo. They will likely use it in one of their newsletters or on their website, and that gives you additional visibility, perhaps with people you might not be reaching otherwise. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Marcia. That's terrific. I think, once again, you highlighted a number of key elements, but some we've heard before. The idea, clearly, we are stronger together. No question that's a really key element point. The critical nature of responding to new trends. I mean, having a chance to be able to look and see what is going on out there. You're really trying to advocate for what's going to happen in the future, not what's happened in the past. Really important point, I think. The fact that small agencies can do it, and that means maybe, again, as we talked about before, you may partner with other people and do it, but even though you're a small agency, you can do it, and building those relationships is long-term, and it's a long-term relationship in terms of advocacy with a small a, and that is that advocacy, important point, encompasses a wide range of relationships and of opportunities that you're going to interact in your community or in your state. Really important points. And I think just finally, you made a good point sort of subtly, but I think that it was an important one. That is that don't be intimidated by it. I mean, it seems like it is, but don't be intimidated. And even with board members and with students or others, just get out there and do it. Yeah, you're going to make some mistakes, and there'll be some things that aren't going to happen and be really perfect, but it's really worth actually getting out there and just keep trying. And it'll be easier and easier the more that you actually do it. So I think that's terrific opportunity. And thank you. I think we're going to turn over to questions, but I was thinking in terms of that importance of sort of having some fun doing it. And I can think back on an old experience that actually you and I had back in the National Coalition for Literacy Days, and we had sponsored a briefing, which were very very helpful things you can do. We had done one up on Capitol Hill. It was very well attended. It was executed perfectly. I had been the chair, and Marcia was helping put that thing actually together in pieces on there. And we had many staffers, a number of Congress people doing. And so it was just terrific. And we finished the whole event, and we were sitting, sipping, appreciating what a great job it was. And at that point, we looked up and someone tapped us on the shoulder and said, "Did you really mean to do that?" And we had a wonderful logo for the National Coalition for Literacy that was right like this pro-literacy logo right up here. And we'd had someone outside do it and produce it for us and put it there. What we had neglected to realize is that they had spelled coalition wrong for the Coalition for Literacy. Practically no one noticed. It was a great event, and we laughed about it. But that's not a good example in terms of advocacy, but the event itself was. And so we encourage you to try it even if you do it. You'll probably do a better job at spelling things than we did. With that, I'd really like to, we'll see if there are some questions here in the audience. We'll also go online if there are any, and then I also have some. So questions from here, or comments as well. Okay, while people are thinking a little bit, I'm going to pose the first one, because I do have one, a couple. When you think about the experiences that you've had relative, what were some of the biggest surprises in terms of getting engaged, particularly in the early stages of getting involved in literacy? You know, what was the biggest surprise for you? Either a hurdle, it could be good or it could be bad in terms of your early experiences. So maybe we could start with Mark. Why don't you give a shot
Sure.
first?
Actually, one of them really was, you know, a lot of the focus often is on new legislation or renewed legislation, and we, you know, people do respond, whether that's letter writing or phone calls or visits or all of those things. But, you know, then the law gets passed and we either celebrate or we bemoan the outcome. But the implementation piece, I think, is just as critical. Why this has to be constant, because even if we get the legislation we want, if we don't focus on the institutionalization of that, then sometimes you think you had a victory that doesn't pay fruit. And even if what we advocate in legislation doesn't land in there, there's still opportunity to influence those, you know, paid professional people, the administrators, the appointed officials, in order to get what we need for our particular cause or program. So that was something that took me a while to learn, and that you have to, you know, make sure that people do, you know, exactly what they say they can do. I think WEO is a good example of that, in terms of not everything that the adult literacy field wanted, but still opportunities to influence local workforce investment boards, state level implementation of those things. So the implementation piece, staying vigilant and keep working, is one that
Yeah.
Good
point.
If I
Yep,
could
Marcia,
follow
jump in.
that,
Yep.
you know, we tend to think of advocacy as legislative, right, as lobbying your legislator. But there is, as you point out, there is administrative advocacy as well. Because once these laws are passed, most of them end up with regulations. And the regulations go through a public process, and you can influence those, particularly at the state level. I think there's really wide opportunity to influence the way these things are actually put into practice. I think in answer to the question, when I first got involved in literacy, and I'm younger than Peter, so it wasn't quite as many years ago as he did.
Not prehistoric.
Yeah, it surprised me that this issue didn't resonate more, and I was completely new to it at the time. I was not a nonprofit person. I had come from a corporate life. But once I started learning about adult ed and the value of it and what students accomplish and can do, how transformative it really is, I was surprised that didn't resonate more with legislators, and surprised that there wasn't more awareness at the federal level, and certainly this is also true state and locally about this issue and the role that it plays in addressing other community issues like poverty, as you mentioned, like workforce development and health and and children succeeding in school. All of this comes back to the literacy levels of the adults and parents in the community. So I was shocked at that, and I have to say I still am 20 years later. We have never found the magic formula for communicating this. It's a complicated issue, and you have to try to put it into, you have to simplify it in order for people to understand it. All the more reason that it is worth your time to devote a certain amount of your life as the leader of your program to advocacy, to public awareness building.
Sure, that's good. Good, thank you, Marcia, good. Kathleen, how about you?
And to build off of that, I think the biggest surprise probably for Becky and I, we both probably will echo this, is as much as hunger is a nonpartisan issue, no one's pro-hunger. But when you went into an elected official's office, I think the biggest part for us is they're actually people. And they're just people who are living daily lives, very busy schedules. But what we have found with interacting with them is, in one way or another, whether it's the member or a family member of that elected official, they've all been touched by hunger in one way or another, whether it's their grandmother who raised them, whether it was that they needed to use food stamps back then, to that they've used a pantry, that the family member has used a pantry. So hunger for us has touched a lot of the elected officials, and I think that brings it back around where, they're so scary in their Armani suits, and the marble, and it all seems so scary and Hollywood-like, and yet these are real people. And if you connect with them and hear what they have to say on a personal level, that's what the most surprising is. They're people and they have the same stories as our clients and our constituents. They're just in a different office. So that's been able to connect us. So that's probably been the most surprising.
That's great. Let me ask a question that is somebody had asked me some time ago, and this is a perfect panel to ask you. What's the best structure in terms of inviting someone to your program and to actually see something, assuming you have something to see or experience something in terms of doing that? Because many times that is some of the most effective ability to be able to establish that advocacy piece, but it becomes kind of daunting. We often have termed Capitol Hill, when people have gone out from local programs, and it's usually staffers, they said, we can't believe how much you do with so little. And that's just what you want them to
Right.
see. And we really had converts in there. But it was really visiting the programs that had really been the key to them. What are your thoughts on, tricks about doing that and things that you've learned, and how, no matter who you are, to invite someone, staffer or policymaker or other community member? What are some tricks of the trade there that are helpful for local programs in that regard?
Three probably top that come to my mind is research them, make sure you know what they have supported so you can thank them the minute they walk in the door. Jill Brand came to the food bank and I said, thank you for continuing to support child nutrition. You've been a huge champion for us. Keep it to, you have to learn your 1-minute elevator speech and keep it to that, because when they have media and they have staffers following them, your time with them, even though they might be there for 30 minutes, is very constrained. So how to keep it concise, get to your points, thank them, and then really it's about your program. Whether for us it's the distribution center and I can walk out and say, this is the Costco of food banking, or it's a summer feeding site where I can say, here's some kids who need our nutritious food. You have to be able to present that in 5 minutes or less, because the timing of things, they're going to get swooped away by media.
Great comments, yeah. Marcia, Mark?
Yeah, I think, again, it's relationship building. So if you are having a big event and the very first time you've ever reached out to your senator is to invite him or her to that event, you shouldn't be surprised if the answer is no. But if you have cultivated a relationship with the staff in that office, and you can call up and say, I would love to have Senator Schumer in New York come to my event, but I know he's really busy, and if you're able to come, that would be great too. and especially if you're talking to regional staff. And then at the state level, again, I have found that they are more accessible. So, but it's all about the relationship. And if you have that ongoing relationship, you will start to get some yeses. Also managing their expectations at your event. So if you're not inviting them to speak, but you're just inviting them to do a meet and greet, make sure the staff know that. Because if they've prepared 30 minutes worth of remarks and you don't let them to the podium, that's a big mistake to make.
Yeah, that builds on the observation that it's really the staff that run the government anyway. People think it's the elected officials, but not. Before we go out there, Mark, any thoughts, quick ones you
Just
have?
a couple. Northside Learning Center is serves refugees and immigrants, providing introductory, very basic adult English language instruction. At the same time, so that they can attend classes, their children come for homework help. So thinking about elected officials, appointed officials, staffers, donors, we just invite them for a tour. And I guess it might sound risky, but actually we don't script it. We don't have people. And when people go in and just engage, be it with the youth or the adults, they come out, and then we start to talk a little bit more about the issues, the policy pieces. So that's worked very well. But we've also invited elected officials in particular to be, keynote speakers at our address, and that's been very, very effective as well. And just one other real quick thing, at those dinners, which are fairly informal, we always have volunteers, and I've been amazed at how often the volunteer story is what really reaches an official or a donor or someone else. I think they see themselves in that person, and to see a young person, in particular a university student, talk about how she changed her major because of her experience, generated enormous both knowledge and goodwill.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. Very good point. Good. I think we have a question about in the back of it.
We have a couple questions in the room and online.
Great.
I know the federal look, if you usually go out there, it seems like you meet with staffers and you never really meet with a real representative. Wondering if it's still worthwhile or how you get past the staffers or what you suggest.
It's still worthwhile. Absolutely. It's never, ever a problem to get your name out there. And if you can leave information, the staff's job is to share that with the members. So it's disappointing for us to not see the actual member, but the staffer is the one who's going to listen to you and take that and then share that information. And honestly, probably as we started over the years, even prior to engaging in an advocacy manager, it was going out, and 90% of the time you met with the member or with the staffer, and we still were able to say, here's what the food bank is doing, here's why it's important, and then they start to recognize who food bank is. So it's very important.
Yeah. Any other comments?
No.
Okay,
Just
thanks.
agree.
Good. All right. Back then, coming online.
So we have a question online from Simpson County Literacy. They ask, can you share tips for advocating without violating IRS 990 rules on lobbying?
Okay. Yeah. For ways to stay legal, in other words. Good. And just, Marcia, I know you have wandered these halls often. We'll turn to you.
So with respect to federal lobbying laws, they are pretty straightforward. You can spend as a nonprofit up to 20% of your budget. You do have to report that on your 990 if you're going to engage in that activity. State laws vary state by state, and the place to look for what the rules are in your state is your state attorney general's office. There are often rules in addition to the federal rules that you need to pay attention to, particularly if you receive state money. Always good to get the advice of your tax accountant on this so that you are recording those expenses properly. But the bottom line is you have a federally guaranteed right to express your point of view about your issue. And if you are not asking them to do something specific about a specific piece of legislation or appropriations, if you are just there to educate or give them a program update, but you're not asking them to do something about this particular bill or that particular appropriation, that is not considered lobbying under IRS rules. But your state may not share that point of view. So you've got to know both the federal and the state rules.
That's
And we
great.
could do a whole seminar on
Yeah.
just that.
We may follow up on that. Marcia has spent 2 years in jail as a result of this, actually, so she's had, I'm just kidding, No, has been very helpful in keeping me out of jail, actually, in terms of that. And in general, it's not usually a real problem, but it's one, I think it's a really good thing to connection. And a lot of people do forget about the state regulations being different. I think that's a really good point, so it's good. Great. Okay, yes?
Yes, I have a question. Marcia, you mentioned earlier about having a shortage of time because you're multitasking with many different hats. What percentage of your time would you put towards advocating for your program? I mean, you probably have to carve out, do you carve out like so many hours every week or?
It depends what's going on. Less than 20%.
Yes, of course.
Just in case the IRS is listening. I guess on a rolling average, I'm probably spending about 5% of my time on this specifically. But it ebbs and flows according to what's going on in my agency and what's going on legislatively. So, for example, some of you locally know we have a big event coming up, a fundraising event in Syracuse for my agency, and I took the time last week to call all of my state legislators and ask them to drop in. That happened in connection with the event. I think the important thing is just to look at this as activity that is going to pay for your agency and benefit your agency over time. And so like anything else you are doing strategically, whether it's fund development or PR or whatever, you've got to spend a little bit of time on it. Just so you're in the loop, you're on the screen, and they know what you think is important. That's really important.
Good.
I guess I would just add, especially coming from, the ACTS perspective, where the total staff was 1.25 FTE, is belief in volunteers, that they can actually do this work. And that was the entire model, where groups of people came with the sole purpose of advocating on an issue. I was intrigued by your advocacy captains. It sounds like, that's a good piece. So I do think staff have to pay some attention, but there's a lot more capacity within your networks, your groups, to do this work.
And your board. If you have
Exactly.
a board of directors, this is one of their jobs, is to advocate for your organization. So making sure that they are participating, set up an advocacy committee if you don't have one.
Great, good. Yeah, Kathleen, anything?
I think I echo that, and in talking about your board, actually, we did a board survey that said, here's all your representatives, do you know anybody?
Yeah.
And how do you make connections? So utilizing them to get us in or make a connection. So if you do not have a board or an advisory committee at your agency, those would be the folks that maybe survey and say, do you know any of our representatives? And if there's an opportunity to meet via that way, and they can make that introduction.
Terrific, thank you. Well, we have time for one more question, and I just will say that the panelists may be able to stay around here to follow up with any of the folks who are here. For folks who are online, if you do want to continue to send in additional questions, or even after this session, some things come to you. If you want to send those to ProLiteracy, we'll be happy to contact the panelists and or get back with information to you later on in the week, so we appreciate it. So I think we have one more question. Sarah in the back?
For programs that are new to advocating on their behalf, if say they're a new program or just a program that hasn't had the staff time to devote to it, how do they get on an agenda for a meeting with their local elected official or their federal elected official? What's the best way to get a meeting with them, and then what do they prepare for a meeting?
So call up and ask for the scheduler and tell them who you are and what agency you represent and why you want the meeting. And then, as Kathy said, make sure you have the data. You have to have data about your program, the impact your program is having in your community, and you have to have stories. And then if it's possible, as Mark said, to bring a student or a constituent to that meeting, or a board member or volunteer, do that, and then say thank you afterwards.
They really want these meetings.
Yeah.
They want to meet people, they want to have relationship. You do, the first time, I think there's some intimidation, but people really want these meetings, want to learn about the community, want to make connections. So there's a lot in it for them as well, so.
Okay,
I'm just
great.
actually curious how many in the room do advocacy currently? So not bad.
Yeah, maybe right a third or so, and so we'll hopefully, when we come back next year, have a larger number of individuals coming up. Well, I want to do two things. One is I want to encourage all the panelists here and online, if you wouldn't mind filling out your survey and get those back to us, and also with the folks online. We really appreciate that. Cannot thank the panelists enough. I think that it's really, really important as an issue, but more importantly, appreciate the work and the leadership and the modeling that you have given to everyone here. It's really remarkable. You know, John Paul Getty once said, "Success is easy, rise early, work hard, strike oil." And, you know, in our field, it's hard to strike oil, and the way you do it is by working as advocates and advocacy, and it's the only way you do it. So I just want to, again, thank you. Certainly helps us, both as a national organization, but most importantly, I think, at the local level. So thank you very much. We'll give you a round of applause. Good job. See everybody later. Stick around.
I like how you took the IRS one. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I was thinking back to Marcia's workshops.
Yes. We really could do like a day on that.
Yeah, you know, it's like, okay, how about